Hey, what's up guys? JB here. So we're into a new month here of November, and a unit that was actually skipped over for us here in Global has been released this week, and that is Melnia. Now over in JP, this unit was actually released about a month after Alaya came into the game, but for us here in Global, it's actually going to be closer to 2 months. So despite being past that road to worldwide, we are still playing a bit of catch up here with this unit. Of course, Melnia, a very prominent character in the story there for some time. So I know that there are at least some folks out there that have been anticipating and waiting for this unit to come into the game. So let's dive into the kit and find out what she can do, especially now that the meta seems to have shifted, a bit beyond, what she was originally released to excel against. So Melnia will be joining War of the Visions as a 100 cost Earth unit. She will be repping the gun group and has a base 3-1 movement, and she can wear hats and cloth. Starting first with the TMR, it's pretty decent for a ranged unit, maybe one who's lacking in that reaction block area. Certainly can be useful for negating some of that RNG that can occur maybe with a reflex or something like that. Many of the newer high proc chance counters in the game actually don't proc against missile damage, save for maybe that sword sorcerer group. So, maybe your mileage actually may vary with this TMR. So certainly not my favorite one, but I actually do really like the base stats. It's another 4 agility TMR, and it's an accessory that everyone can wear, so from that agility tuning standpoint, maybe it could have some value. Moving now into her stats, it's a pretty solid overall picture here. When comparing Melnia against the UR units as a whole, her HP level is very much middle of the pack. But for a range unit, similar to what we saw with Irvine, she's going to be above average against most of her peers in that group. In terms of her main damage attribute of attack, she's going to be coming in above average in both base and innate value. That is going to be pretty notable for a missile unit. Generally, they're not getting up to this high of an attack value. Do keep in mind though, she doesn't have any attack-based passives to boost that up any further, so I think it does actually balance out at the end of the day. Now, similar to other ranged units in the game, the highlight for Melnia is really going to be that dexterity value. She's coming in at that 312 innate value, which does put her within the top 15 in all of War of the Visions. So that certainly is going to help out that innate accuracy there just a little bit, but even more so on that innate crit value where she's coming in well above average. On that note of accuracy though, she can be built extremely accurate, despite having more of an average luck value here. She does have access to actually 2 different accuracy passives that you could put on if you really did need them. Although I don't really think that is her best build. You certainly could pull in one and I think actually be in a pretty good spot though. In terms of speed, she is going to be on the faster side in terms of her base agility. Unfortunately though, no agility based passive to bump that up any further. So when we do factor in passives amongst the URs as a whole, she is going to be brought down to an average level of speed. For mitigation, 0 defense and 0 spirit for Melnia innately. Her resistances are going to be 10% against slash and missile, 5% against magic, but really her forte is that strike damage coming in at 20% innate. She's just going to have a single weakness here. It is going to be that pierce damage coming in at a -10 value. Again, she's going to be profiling very similar in her resistances to Irvine, who we did look at recently here on the channel. For her ailment resistances, we're looking at 50% against blinds, making her a very suitable answer to evasion matchups. And then she's going to be bringing in 50% to confuse and 10% against sleep. Now, sleep is definitely one we've been seeing a little bit of an uptick here in the game, including on Melnia herself. She does have access to a sleep ailment that we'll look at here in a few minutes. For her mastery ability, she's going to be getting 20% attack, which was factored into that value above, as well as that 20% reaction block. When you do take her all the way up to level 140, she will add in that 15% unit resist, 15% accuracy, again factored in above, as well as an upgrade to her Job 25 ability. There are a couple of standout passives, I think, for Melnia, and they really are both revolving around those damage and defense penetrations that she has access to. Now, the defense pen passive I've highlighted here, it does reduce her movement, similar to what we've seen with Alaya and Rugia there in the past. Melnia, though, does have a second defense pen passive that she does have access to, which you can bring in if you really wanted to get a very high level of defense penetration, or if you simply didn't want to reduce her movement but still have access to defense penetration. Overall, very nice flexible options here for Melnia with these passives. For a counter ability, she is picking up reflex from that ranger sub job, so you'll definitely want to have that one set at all times. Moving on now into the main job skills, and we're going to start off here with the buffs. Her self buff is going to increase her range by 1, while at the same time giving her 40% attack, 25% crit, and 25% agility. Really getting a lot of value here out of this single buff, not really much bad I can say about it. Her party buff is going to be a large diamond targeting radius. It's going to make it very flexible for her to use, especially if you have reduced her movement. And this one is going to pass Protect onto her allies. It's then going to give her an increased defense penetration by 20, and then finally add an innate Re-Raise Dispel to her attacks for 3 turns. So another very nice buff here for Melnia. Of course, that's going to be great in that dark matchup against Raph. And similar to Alaya, this unit is yet another one who is really devaluing that re-raise status in particular. Looking at the main skills for Melnia here next, her low AP attack is going to be that base range of 5 and a range height of 2. Do keep in mind here that all of the skills here in the main kit can be extended in their range with that passive or with that self buff that we just looked at. Now this skill here is going to have that usual low 121% mod. However, it does have a conditional mod increase of 40%, which would bring it up to a medium damage modifier. And that is if your target currently has the status of haste, AP Restore, or Sleep. So it's a pretty nice low AP attack. It's going to actually allow her to finish off some opponents, maybe a little bit cheaper AP wise, because it is actually getting up to that medium modifier here. Now her second skill here is going to be a single target large 200% modifier, and do notice that this one is an arcing shot, which is definitely huge for a gunner unit like this, and certainly was one of the problems that we saw with Irvine here recently a couple of weeks ago. Now effects wise, this is going to be a big healing power debuff of 70. Now do note that if you are using Melnia's new weapon that does come along with the farming event along with her, she can actually stack another 20 healing power debuff on top of that, getting it up to a total of 90. So that's going to be very strong, especially if you're encountering any sort of heal back units or, really any team that's relying heavily on healing for sustain. Now the third attack here is going to be another one of those select 2 abilities. She was actually supposed to be the first ranged unit in the game to have this capability. However, Irvine came in and stole her thunder there just a little bit. This one is going to be a 2-hit attack with a medium modifier. It is carrying an X factor here, and then it does have a 25% chance to sleep your targets. And that will be especially good if she's able to line up and hit maybe somebody on the back line, like a healer. Generally, they're going to have very high faith, giving this, a pretty nice chance to proc. Remember that when you are asleep, you do take 50% bonus damage, so definitely an underrated status ailment in the game, in my opinion. Her final skill is the only area of effect attack here in the main kit. It does get up to a base range of 5 there on the cross AoE. The base modifier of this skill is only 140%. However, it does have a conditional modifier increase once again, and that is based on how many units you actually catch in your area of effect. That's going to cap out at a total of 75% if you do catch 3 units or more. Now this skill here is another arcing shot for Melnia, so definitely nice attack flexibility here in the main kit, something that we haven't traditionally seen on gunner style units. Now this attack does have a general dispel effect that comes in prior to the damage, so anything that's classified as a buff, including haste, will be removed on this skill. So very nice utility, especially for the earth element, which actually doesn't have very many units that have that capability. Now finally here we do have the limit burst. No dead zone you'll notice on this skill, so she's going to be able to target this one anywhere around her. Now prior to the damage, this one does break barriers, so this is actually the only barrier break for her here in her entire kit. Nice that she has it, but on the flip side, you can only use that LB once, so it's not going to be quite as nice for Guild Wars situations. Now this one does have a 67% chance to poison your target, so between this and that sleep attack that we just looked at, does give you a very compelling reason to run this unit at 97 faith, especially because she is a long range unit. In a lot of situations, she's going to be out of the enemy line of fire. Now, if you do land that poison onto your enemy, it is going to carry an additional debuff, reducing the human killer of your target by 40. Not hugely impactful, I would say, on its own. You're essentially just dropping any attack modifier they have by 40. However, it's going to stack with any other debuffs that you might apply, maybe like a bravery down, maybe an attack magic debuff. And when you start adding all those things together, I think it can actually make a nice difference. So decent LB here, but again, this being her only barrier break, I think it actually may cause her some issues on some fights, something that can always be shored up by a teammate though. So there is a new vision card that's going to be coming in alongside Alaya. For us here in Global, this one is going to be coming in next week. This one is going to be called the Blood-Soaked Road here in Global. Now, I have talked about this VC before, especially on the podcast, but this is the type of job VC that, in my opinion, is pretty much a can't miss type card. If you're an account that, has really been selective about which job VCs that you pull, I think this is one that you should probably strongly consider, assuming that you do have some units here on the card, and the job types that can utilize it. And the main reason for that is it does have 2 out of the 3 primary party effects that we look for in terms of PvP. It's carrying 24% unit resist and 15% agility on the same card. On top of that, it does get a healthy amount of reaction block, which is another very, very nice stat to carry. In my view, this Vision card, along with that Full Metal Alchemist card that we got several months back, are best in class in terms of these job cards, specifically for that reason and what effects they carry. Now, this card is going to be effective for that gun group, the Mace group, as well as the Sword C or Knight weapon group. I think this card is going to open up a lot of doors in terms of maybe some new rainbow teams that can be fielded. So I know a lot of people have specifically been waiting on this card. The Knight class certainly has some nice units in there to build with. You've got Bradley, you've got Wing Stern, got Squall in there as well. But I do really like, Melnia's own gun class. I think this is really going to enable some new play that we haven't really seen them in the meta all that much, over pretty much since the 3rd anniversary. So, maybe this is going to be that trigger to finally see them out there on the battlefield. And we'll actually take a closer look at that in the mock build section here shortly. Now, speaking of Melnia's job class, let's take a deeper look into it. Now that Melnia's card is here, we're going to have all of the primary effects covered now by this weapon group, and being able to actually field 2 of those over 1 card, I think is really impactful. You're going to be able to pull into your primary a attack card or a missile up card, and really amp up your offensive potency there at the same time. Now, the gunner job thus far has certainly been treated a lot better than the bow class. We at least have some pretty recent units in here, like an Irvine, even Rugia, who you could pair, in a mono-element party with Melnia. And then even Alaya and the Jadens, they're actually pretty good in their own right as well. We do have a great selection of cards here to support the team as well and really enable some good rainbow teams. The one thing that's missing, for this group is going to be that tank slot, but there is some key overlap here in terms of the Mace group. You are able to bring in Raph from that group utilizing 2 key Vision cards. That is going to be that Melnia card that we just looked at, as well as the Queen Mashari's card from East to Horn. And we'll actually take a closer look at that synergy here in the mock build section next. Alright guys, into the mock builds here. I have 2 builds to share with you guys this week that I'll quickly touch on here now. The first one here is just going to be a traditional mono earth team. And Melnia, despite being on the bulkier side, she is still a ranged unit. She is a little bit frail. You're definitely going to want to tank out in front of her for auto play. So we're going to bring in Dialdo to fill that slot. Of course, you could always throw in Moraga or Mont, maybe for lower cost formats. For a secondary DPS, I'm going to go with King Bradley. I think he's the best overall choice. He's going to cover a lot of bases, especially that barrier break issue. He has no problems dealing with those. So pretty standard setup here in terms of the Vision cards. Of course, we're going to have our unit, area resist, and agility covered in our primary slots. If you don't have that Dark Golem card, remember that Earth does have the Dreams of Heroism, area resist card that you could pull in there instead. Now, I am going to be putting a lot of focus here in the build against strike and lightning resistance. So this team, I think, will be able to perform very, very well against those Elias strike teams out there. Probably even still perform pretty well if Edward is even in there on top of it. So you can see here in the stats box, we're going to have a very nice unit resistance there, getting up to 50, which is very substantial for a ranged unit. And even the strike resistance for Melnia is going to be pretty solid, coming in at a minimum of 35%. You could even pull it higher, depending on your Esper choice. Now, obviously, the defense pen here is a little bit of concern, only 50 in this particular build. Although you can actually push that up a little bit higher, depending on your weapon choice. You could opt for something like the Peacemaker here instead of her own weapon. That would get her up to 60%. So definitely keep that in mind if you were maybe trying to push her offense output, just a little bit higher. She does also have that self buff of 20 defense pen that you can add in on top of that. You are going to be susceptible to dispels at that point. So here is the second build, guys, and as I was just alluding to, this one is going to be packing a little bit more offensive punch. We are going to be utilizing the Peacemaker here in this particular build. And I am going to actually be doubling up and adding the Genji Glove for the 10% physical damage amplification as well. Now, the premise of this build is going to be a gun synergy group utilizing those job vision cards that we were looking at. And as I mentioned, those type of units, they do really like to have a tank presence for them in auto PvP. so that they're able to really take advantage of that range and stay safe on the battlefield. Now, as I talked about a couple of minutes ago, I am going to be pulling in Raph into this group, kind of utilizing the synergy of those two particular vision cards from East to Horn, as well as Melnia's own vision card. Just those two cards alone are going to be covering all three of the primary effects that we look for. Then you can just slap on the Black Rose of the Battlefield in Raph's subslot, and she's going to be good to go at that point. Just fill in the rest maybe with some offensive output, as I've done here. Now, as a third unit, I am bringing in Alaya here for this build. As the meta stands right now, I do think that Irvine is probably a better overall choice. I think that Irvine and Melnia do kind of synergize very, very well together. I think they're designed to work together from the ground up. However, I do know that a lot of people actually weren't able to pull for Irvine, so I do think that Alaya can represent a very nice option as well. Alaya does help cover that innate wind weakness that Melnia has, so I think that it is a pretty solid combination overall. Now, in terms of the stats for this build, you can see it's definitely more offensive oriented than the prior builds. The unit resistance in particular, not quite as nice here. Still not too shabby though at 39%. The crit potential here though is definitely off the charts. She's going to be able to crit pretty much automatically against the majority of units that you see out there in battle. Now, in this build, I have also bumped up the accuracy a little bit as well with a Luck Trust Zone set. However, if you were going up against evade units, you definitely would want to trade out that Genji Glove for an Alex Ring, and I think that you would be good to go at that point. So those are the two builds, guys. I think a couple of pretty nice options here. As always, if you're interested in checking out the finer details of these builds on WoTV Calc, I will go ahead and drop a link to those in the description below. So what is my verdict today on Melnia? Starting with the positives, I think that she's positioned well for survival in this current unit and strike resist meta that we're currently experiencing, being well above average in those categories compared to her ranged brethren. She also has a very good base to build from in terms of her accuracy and especially her crit potential, which in kind will help amplify her damage as well. She does have a nice assortment of utility that she can bring to your team, with a substantial healing power debuff capability, an AoE general dispel, re-raise removal, and then several status ailments that she can also inflict onto her enemies. Now, in a new addition here for the verdict section, I have highlighted here what I think are some of the better matchups for Melnia in the current meta, and I think that she is definitely going to be a very nice solution to those Lightning or Alaya teams out there. And likewise, I think that she can build extremely accurate. I think that she can be a very competent and effective evade hunter as well. Now, on the more negative side for Melnia, she is going to be coming in with 0 area resistance, also 0 defense and spirit. Her HP in most builds, I think, is going to be well below 10,000 on top of it. So if an enemy is able to get to her on the back line, or maybe if they're able to clip her with a large area of effect attack, I don't think that you can reasonably expect to get more than 2 hits from Melnia before she goes down. Unless, of course, that's going to be a unit-based or a lightning attack. Now, she does also carry a heavy pierce weakness at -10, and that, of course, is something that the wind element has been known for and is pretty strong with, so certainly something else to keep in mind out there in terms of your matchups. Now, another negative for this unit, I think, is going to be the damage potential. No imperils, no breaks, no way for her to deal with the protect status, and her only barrier break is a single target on her limit burst, so definitely kind of limits how often she's able to use that one. She's also really lacking when it comes to large area of effect attacks. She only has 1 in her entire kit, and it's just a cross AoE. Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think that she's going to be bad for damage output by any means. I think that she's going to be, pretty decent. I just don't think that she's going to be that type of unit that you can look to really carry you and really be putting out those big numbers in terms of damage. Now, in terms of the matchups for her that I think maybe aren't so good, because of that lack of barrier break, because of that lack of courage removal, and then that general weakness against area damage, Seth and Bradley, I think, are going to be 2 units you definitely need to watch out for with this unit. And then, of course, the wind element being her natural counter, you're going to want to stay away from that matchups, if you can avoid it. At the end of the day, though, I do believe that Melnia represents, one of the best range units that we've seen come into the game to date, if not the best one. She has very nice flexibility with the range and especially the arcing of her shots, being a gunner unit. She does have that status ailment infliction angle that she brings. And then her long range select 2 attack, I think, are all going to be very nice things for her. And because of those things, I think that she can be very competitive and frankly a compelling option, depending on the matchups that you're seeing out there in battle. So all of those things are very good. At the same time, though, this unit coming into our meta here, nearly a month late, I think has done a bit of a disservice for her, and kind of she's lost maybe some of her prime opportunities to be used in the meta, especially as an Elia counter, as you know, Saul is now here and we're starting to see a little bit of a downtick in some of those strike team usage. And not only that, but Final Fantasy IX and Zidane are going to be coming into our game here in probably just about a month, and I think that is certainly going to be bad for the Earth element in general. So because of those things, I do believe it's probably best for most people out there to skip over this unit, maybe wait for an off banner, maybe at most, maybe just picking up some shards to accelerate her building in the future. So there it is, guys. That is my review today on Melnia. Some final thoughts here from me. I was super excited when this unit was announced in JP. It seemed like she was going to be that perfect solution and that must-pull unit to deal with that Elia problem. However, with our accelerated schedule and Saul jumping up in the schedule, I think that Elia's reign has been curbed here on global, quite a bit. So I'm really not sure that Melnia is that must-pull unit that I initially thought that she might be. Of course, we will have the new Lightning Astrius coming to us here in Global very, very soon, probably within the next couple of weeks. So she certainly could be very, very solid in that matchup as well. However, with Final Fantasy IX right around the corner, I'm just not sure how many people are actually going to pull for that unit or could really afford to do so at this point. As always, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. Did you end up pulling for Melnia today, or are you in horde mode for Zidane and Vivi? While you're down there, hit that like button for me. It really helps me out with the YouTube algorithm. And if you like what I'm doing here on the channel, hit that subscribe button if you want to see more. And that's really all that I have to say for today. So as always, stay safe out there, and I'll see you guys in the next one.